One. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 4. As always, I've got Julie Vento with me, my lovely mother. I'm your host, Tommy Vento. Um, Today, really something that's been on my mind for the last couple days, if it's okay with you, if we chat about it, is I'll call it presence. I'll call it consciousness. I'll call it the now. I might use those words interchangeably as we talk today, but really it's the emphasis on being here. I think that I'm reading Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, doing a little bit more of a deep dive than the first time I kind of read it and gained a bunch of the thoughts and teachings from it. But one of the things that he really comes back to is the fact that there really is nothing but the now. And the first thing that I thought of when I heard that was when Moses is sort of meeting God for the first time and he says, who are you? What are you? And another translation of that is, what type of being are you? And God's answer is, I am. And I think that that is brilliant, first of all. but more than that, it's sort of this multi-layered declaration. It is, for the purpose of what we're talking about today, there is nothing outside of now. We can say sort of the eternal now, and the ego absolutely insists upon the filter of time, because the ego is inherently part of the world of birth and death, of beginnings and endings, of form and matter that will eventually pass away from the way that we understand it. And so I think that it's very easy, and even I'll say logical at times, to be connected to the process of time, especially from an understanding while we're on this earth, in the same way that a tree goes through a life cycle, so will our body. But I think it's actually our subconscious attachment to the ego, to identifying with and as our egoic mind, that prevents us from escaping time and then using it as a tool while we're here on earth, rather than it being a fixture of this reality as we perceive it. So I know that that's a really
That's a lot.
vague,
Yeah.
it's a vague intro. That's a lot. This might be something that maybe we do for kind of a couple subsequent sessions, but there's a handful of verses that have kind of come up to me as we've been going through this teaching. And it sounds like, as we were chatting beforehand, there might be one or two that are sort of top of mind for you. But if we will, kind of putting a pin in the concept of now, the verse that's really on my heart right now is Proverbs 12:12. And it's, the wicked covet the proceeds of wickedness, but the root of righteousness bears fruit. And I think that, for me, again, how many layers deep is that? But ultimately what he's teaching is that the wicked coveting the proceeds of wickedness just has to do with selfish gain. And it has to do with, how does this serve me? How does anything serve me? And one of the things that in all 4 of the Gospels, as well as in a lot of the letters of Paul, James, John, Peter, they all allude back to Christ as a servant king. And I think that one of the things he says is, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, is sort of a roundabout teaching of this very premise, that he didn't come I mean, he's the fullness of God on earth. And I think for a lot of us, especially as we identify with the ego, with the mind, would say that that means my life looks like X. That means that every time I'm driving, it's only green lights. That means that when I walk into the bakery, they're like, oh, you're our 1000th customer. Here's free coffee and food. It's like we would think similar to like having a genie, that the power of God would mean our life would look like that. And I think that part of the purpose of the earthly experience is what Paul says in Philippians, that Jesus came and did not see the power of God as something to be exploited, something to be clung to, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, which he is the exact representation of God. And so he came here, and that was how he chose to display himself. And so I think that I think just in recognizing that the very root of his being produced righteousness. He didn't have to strive. He didn't have to take steps in order to display righteousness, to show people so that they would come to believe in him. All the signs and wonders, all the things that he spoke, all the situations he found himself in was actually just him being so connected, the true branch, if you will, the true vine, being so connected to the Spirit of God that the fruit of him being that way was a life that looked the way his looked. And so, again, that might seem like it's over in left field, but how that sort of relates to the now is I personally have come to realize my obsession with the future. It is a fixation almost. I know we've talked about it. Religion kind of says, not you, not yet. And I've gotten over not you in a lot of ways. I recognize, okay, that is me, but it's still not yet. It's still that at some point off in the future, this existential being that is God will have to do something to me or for me that will, from that moment on, okay, then I'm good. And I think that in a lot of ways that has been twofold. It's a way that I escape the now so that I don't have to take personal responsibility for look at my life, as well as, funny, I mentioned the personal responsibility. I think that's the second piece of it, is that it makes it something outside of me, a person, a being, a circumstance, an event in the future, that until that moment, my striving is kind of irrelevant. And I think that that is in a lot of ways how, people turn to a million different things. It's drinking, drugs, sex, food, relationships, shopping, whatever it is. These are things that temporarily alleviate sort of the unconscious pain that we just have all the time. And in doing so, we actually become addicted to this activity that in moderation can be just a wonderful, enjoyable thing. But it becomes for us compulsive in order to escape the pain and dread that we feel right now. And that to me is another way of saying that we've become obsessed with the future, where as I sit right here sober, there's a moment in the future where I will be not sober and life will be better then. I'll be happier then. Things will be better. And I have tons of data, like the physical emotions in my body, some of the thoughts in my mind that come with non-sobriety, that continue to be stacking evidence that that's a true thing. But I think that's where, even if I have countless proof that this has been the case so far, I think what he's talking to me about and how he's using the power of now is to show me that I think it's Second Peter. He has given you everything you need for life and godliness. And that doesn't mean externally it exists and you can go find it, get it, have it, use it. It is already right now what he's put in you, the spirit he's breathed into you, reborn, has everything that it needs. And it's actually my subconscious disagreeing with that continues to have me participate in actions, habit, reactions where I need something outside of myself and off in the future in order to really experience peace, joy, happiness, love. Does that all make sense? I know, again, we're...
it's making sense to me. I just want to augment, you had mentioned earlier offline that having an awareness of the fullness that you are in the now has changed your prayer life, because we find that when we're always
going,
and I'm going, well, not you, not yet, which we've joked as religion, but that's true. That's kind of the ego that's telling you you don't qualify for the not you part. And we've talked about how we can kind of quiet those things by understanding who we are. But the not yet is like something in the future. I'm going to need something from someone, especially you, God. So I think a lot of our prayers, like, I need healing, and then I'll be okay. Well, most of those kind of prayers, he can't answer. He's like, I already gave it to you.
Yeah,
I've given you so much that we can, instead of asking for in the future, that we kind of rearrange our prayer so that we can learn to stand in it because it's already available to us.
100%. And
in not fact, to say that's not a journey, or that's not a process, or that doesn't take time, right?
Yes, totally. Yeah. Totally. And well, two thoughts now. The first one is, as you were saying that, I was kind of almost seeing the glimpse of the separation of the 30, 60, 100 fold. It's like at the very root, when you're saved, you get the 30 fold. And from that is the not you, not yet. And then you get over not you and you enter the 60 fold. And it is, okay, that's me. He loves me. But, the fullness of that, the kingdom, it's not going to be lived in or experienced in my lifetime. That's on the other side. And that's where we still hold on to the not yet. And the 100 fold is leaving both of those behind. It's you right now. And that parries into the second thought you made. That's not to say there's not still a journey. That's not to say that while we are in the physical realm that experiences time linearly the way that we do, it doesn't mean that instantly all at once. I can't remember which book it's in, but it says lay hold of all the promises. It's not like, okay, yeah, all these promises are your inheritance, but you're going to seek them. You're going to practice them. You're going to do it well and then, or do it not so well and then do it well eventually. And in fact, that is really what I'm learning about the now. I've found myself envious at times almost of when Eckhart Tolle describes his experience. Now, again, I want to say this cautiously. He was experiencing like a deep, deep clinical depression. And so I'm not saying I'm envious of that being on the front end of his story. I'm saying that because of where he was, or perhaps just because of his personal destiny and walk before the Lord, there was a moment where in that moment, he didn't resist it. And it resulted in this radical, immediate shift that has lasted him from then until where we're at now. And I think that that's kind of, believe it or not, attached to the part of me that I'll almost call it the victim in me, is the part that says not yet, where that happened for him. And so it's off in the future. He didn't have to take the personal responsibility of practicing this day in and day out. He didn't have to learn to shift from an unconscious state of being to being more conscious. The shift happened for him. And then now he's able to extremely well articulate, okay, now that I'm conscious, here's all the unconsciousness that was before. And so, again, I kind of say all that just to come back to when we talk about the journey, I recognize that as I'm not standing here in perfect healing, that I don't need to pray for him to give me that, nor do I just need to pray that I could have more intellectual agreement with his promise. I need a radical, and I'm using that word radical because it is, we're departing from religion, I think, on a global scale. When we've talked about people leaving the church in droves, I think in a lot of ways it's because intellectually, most people agree with the teachings of Jesus. That God's way is better than man's way. You can go to any corner of the earth and you can draw two scenarios of like this or like this, and people can tell you which one's better. And yet that intellectual agreement alone does not change our lives. It doesn't come with practical application. It doesn't come with experiencing a new truth. It doesn't come with standing in the promises as though they're true today. And so when I think about a lot of what he's talking to me about with the power of now, it's being able to depart from the lens and the framework I have of there will be a point in the future where I'm finally standing in all these promises and experiencing them as true. That might be factually correct, and yet it's part of my framework, which means that I'm trying to bring the earth with me into the kingdom, where in the kingdom, it's already true now. There is no becoming in the kingdom. And I think this was the verse that you wanted to do. I don't want to steal your thunder, Ezekiel 36:26. And I know that we had talked again offline about how 22 through 33 is basically the entirety of the message that he's displaying to them. But 36:26 specifically saying, and do you want to read it, or do you mind if I do?
Go ahead. Yeah.
A new heart I will give you, and a new spirit I will put within you. And I will remove from your body the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and make you follow my statutes and be careful to observe my ordinances. Then you shall live in the land that I gave to your ancestors, and you shall be my people, and I will be your God. And I think that the land right there, again, if it stirs the pot, let him take it to the Lord. There's several layers. He's no longer in our day and age talking about a physical plot of land. I'm not saying that there aren't holy ground on earth. I'm not saying that the New
story's
Jerusalem
still going on. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm not saying that the New Jerusalem won't be a physical city location on earth. I'm saying that as one of the layers of that teaching, the land that he's proverbially given us is, as we've talked about before, it's the land of milk and honey. It's the land of flowing wine and oil. It's the land where it's watered by rain from the sky, where there is no lack. There's a surplus of everything. That to me is sort of describing the kingdom, but the kingdom exists in a realm beyond matter, form, and separation. The kingdom is, if you can picture it this way, that he's the very source of all light and being. And the kingdom is the first thing outside of that where his very nature is expressed through existence. And now if you go and read Genesis, he created heaven and all its host to exist in this kingdom. But the kingdom was there before he created anyone to occupy it. And so when I talk about the land that we're coming into, I think it's that kingdom that we as sons of God get the closest thing to source itself. Not only do we get him, we get the next layer of it as well. And so when we talk about him putting a new heart, removing the old one, putting a new spirit, removing the old one, he says, I will, through the prophet Ezekiel. And now Jesus has told us it is finished. And so that's already done. And we've talked about this before. If I'm not experiencing it, God doesn't need to change. It's my perspective, my heart beliefs, my, frankly, identification as an ego mind that is waiting for that to come to pass rather than flipping that around, and I'll presuppose that it's already happened. And I'm going to stand and walk further and further into that truth in my soul and body, you know?
Mm. And a lot of people don't, really understand that meditation is how you practice. You'd
Mm,
mentioned earlier that for the practical application, or it's not working for a lot of people because
mm,
they really don't understand that, because that's already true and in your conscious mind, you aren't
mm,
experiencing it.
mm,
So what better way than to get quiet the conscious mind a little bit with
mm,
meditation and relaxation, and instead of just like the Eastern religions teach us to take all out of our mind, but it's so powerful to relax and
mm.
then ponder these things, like for you, for instance, the healing that
Yep.
you want in your body. When you can meditate and see yourself already healed
Hmm.
and no longer sick, then that will start to manifest in your life.
Totally.
But you have to really almost take these practice runs with that new heart, because
Hmm.
the new heart he gives, we still have a little bit, we don't know exactly how that happened, but there's a little bit of the old heart there, there's a lot of the old soul, but
Sure.
we don't know what that mix up is. But we can practice with
Mm,
meditation, living in that new heart, fully healed,
yeah.
until that we actually feel it. I think at the end of the sower, the seed parable that we always come back to, it's the measure you meet will be measured back to you.
Yep.
So how long you spend meditating, thinking of living
Mm,
in that new true reality, is
hmm.
what you will actually experience.
Right. And I would, um, to use your word, augment only slightly to say that I don't actually think that there's any of our old heart and soul left outside of where we cling to it. That's why
Yeah,
Jesus is so adamant to die to yourself, pick up your
die.
cross every day, is
Yeah.
because my identification with my past self, my past experience, where during that illusion of separation, I experienced pain, sickness, death, that it's actually my attachment and investment still to that as part of my past self that is carrying it forward into this moment now, you know?
Hmm.
And so it's funny actually in my coaching practice, one of the things that I work with clients on actually quite often is, everyone nowadays hears how meditation is good for you.
Hmm.
But most of the reason that people will maybe begin or have a meditation practice and go away from it is that that's really only one of three prongs of healthy, balanced internal life. So meditation is the grounding portion, which is extremely important. You must be grounded. You must return to that center. But the two other aspects that people forget is a positive, meaning not only do you get grounded, but you replace anything with a positive charge. And then the other side of it is intercepting. So when the negative charge comes, you're able to be immune to it, fend it off, or if that gets in, you don't begin the spiral of death downward where you're doomed for the rest of the day, the rest of the week, whatever, because that negativity found its way into you. And so meditation is, I think, a brilliant practice, but again, it's so misunderstood and at times even mistaught. Meditation does not mean just sitting there with your eyes closed. Meditation is presence. Meditation is acceptance of what is. It is becoming the observer. It is becoming conscious. And so I remember vividly having almost a shouting match with you, because in my very early meditation practice, I kept saying that every 2 seconds, new thoughts come. And it's like a train where the train picks me up where I am. And then all of a sudden, 30 seconds later, I'm in a thought place that I don't know how I got here, but I know I'm not present. And something that was later on described to me was that actually the point where you notice that you've been riding this train, you became present right there. And you notice that you noticed. And so it's not the aspect of never being carried away. It's the aspect of always noticing. And when you notice that you notice, that is the observer. That is, even if for a nanosecond, that is a separation of you from the thought itself, to recognize that you are the conscious presence beyond the thought. And when I think really about the power of now, the verse that Jesus spoke that came to me is, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will have enough problems of its own. Focus here today. And in fact, the Hebrew word for today and day is the same word they use for all divisions of time. It just has to do with context. So that same word means second, minute, hour, day, week, month, year, 1,000 years. It's the same division, because to God, what's a day but 1,000 years? And what's 1,000 years but a day? And as we come back to he's the I am, there is no difference to him between sitting here consciously present for 5 seconds on the clock or 5,000 years on the clock, because it's all now. And so when I think again about the meditation practice, it's a conscious practice of being now and learning to train yourself to have that gap between where the train of thought smacks you and takes you off into the distance. It's shortening that distance constantly between that happening and you noticing, to the point where what I'll say my goal is right now is to no longer be the traffic cop, meaning I don't need to catch every thought. It's like playing that game of whack-a-mole. I don't need to smack every thought as it comes up and stop them. That there's another layer of consciousness available to me where I can zoom out, and that thought coming is just like an ocean wave. It can come and go all in the same sequence without engaging it, judging it, analyzing it, oh, what does that mean? What's this or that? And so,
and with emotions too, I'd like to mention, sorry to interrupt, but
I'd say that
you could do the same
exactly
with emotions, because that's where a lot of people get caught up. Yeah,
absolutely. And to that point, that's where, when I come back to addictions that I've had in the past, it's actually, I'm so unconsciously not at ease that even sitting here for 30 seconds there's so much resistance. And I would label that resistance as I'm having thoughts, I'm uncomfortable, I have a to-do list, I am thinking about this, whatever. All of that is actually resistance. And it manifests itself in different ways because the resistance itself, is trying to manifest in a way where you engage with it. And so if that is pain in your body, if it's a constant nagging thought, if it's whatever, it will present itself to you in a way that becomes more immediately important than your grounding practice. And that's where the whole concept of the obstacle is the way, that's where that whole concept comes from. This resistance that presents itself is not something that you need to solve so that you can come back and meditate. The resistance itself is what's preventing you from being here and now. And yet we're so accustomed to that background. It's like the refrigerator running in the background. You get to the point where you don't hear it anymore. But then when it stops, you're like, oh, that is quieter. That is more peaceful.
Yeah.
That is the very thing that we're going after. And the power of the now is to increase, or should I say decrease, any amount of background static, radiation, noise, resistance, unease that we're so used to tolerating. Now is getting us further and further from tolerating that to the point where, as Peter said, you need nothing added. Everything you need for life and godliness is here, and your acceptance of all that there is the power to be I am. And then if you should need to take a step and change your life situation, make a decision, do something on your to-do list, you do all of that from the place of consciousness and proactive rather than unconscious reactive to this thing that's outside of you.
Or by default is really what we end up just
exactly
behaving half the time on default.
Exactly. And so I think when we come back in the next episode, we could, and maybe we will, maybe we won't, we'll see where that takes us, but we could explore a little bit more. I would be willing to share a handful of things that have presented themselves as resistance to me, and how throughout the course of sort of my journey, I have intellectually agreed with so many of his teachings, but I think that's what he's talking about. Blessed is the hearer and doer of my word. Like, not just hearing it. It's not enough to just conceptually agree. The real fruit of this walk with me is that you will do the word, not by you having to take steps and do an action, but by putting into practice the principles that I'm teaching you. And then the very root of righteousness will bear fruit in your life.
That's going to be a good one.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up there for now, but we'll see you guys next time.
All right.